This is TWiT.
The guys over at the publication The Record had a lengthy conversation with a Russian ransomware attacker by the name of Mikhail Matveev.
Interesting.
And although I didn't think that much of the conversation, which revolved around a lot of the squabblings among adversarial ransomware groups, would be that much interesting to our listeners, Mikhail's answers to a couple of the questions were interesting, so I've selected a few bits out of that longer conversation to share. And I should mention that this is a translation from Russian, because the conversation was held in Russian, so the semantics will be a bit non-English. And I've also edited a bit since this young man's choice of descriptive language was a little bit blue. So it's, it was not safe for work.
Well, he is a hacker. I mean, come on.
Yes, he is. And yeah, I didn't have a problem with it, but, we got a large listening audience.
No,
so
I appreciate that. We don't want to have to scan your face to find out how old you are.
No. Dimitri from The Record asks, how often do people from different affiliate programs compete in the same network to extort victims? Have you had such situations? In other words, Dimitri was asking, are there ever collisions among different attackers? And Mikhail says, this happens often, especially when especially when several people own the exploit or pour logs from the same traffic market. If we are talking about extracting initial access credentials with a stealer. He says, I took some source codes, so-called proof of concept, from GitHub and modified them. If you remember, there was a well-known CVE for the Fortinet VPN. We found it with one programmer from the forum. Based on the list of IP addresses, we got approximately 48,000 entry points. I was very surprised then, really shocked. But we did not even work through 3% of this list. Not enough time. And when others, well, let's say our competitors, began to use this vulnerability, there were intersections across networks. I often went into a network already locked. And by the way, when he says locked, that's his term for encrypted. So, so he went in and everything was, all of the servers were already encrypted. So he says, I often went into a network already locked by someone and didn't touch them because it's not my job to encrypt for the second time. But some guys overlocked networks. They come in and see that it is encrypted, and so that nobody gets it, they encrypt it again. There were cases where the guys and I just crossed paths on the network during development, that is development of their presence in the network, exchanged contacts, and somehow discussed what to do next. We basically always agreed. And it even happened that we then jointly did some other projects. In the summer of 2022, that is this summer, he says this happens all the time because everyone is hungry for the material. How could we get to the initial access? Actually, there aren't many options. There are vulnerabilities such as RCE, remote code execution, in various products of VPN devices. Everything that can give access to the network, or a network access login from stealers. But basically, everyone is now flooded from traffic exchanges, and there is little unique traffic. And those who have it, they pour just for themselves or are already working in some teams. So it's absolutely normal that there is a conflict of interest on the networks, and now it will be even more. Okay, so I thought Mikhail's comments that they were only able to exploit 3% of the list of 48,000 Fortinet VPNs because there's not enough time. In other words, he's saying there really is an active race when a new patch drops and a proof of concept is made available for something like a critical remote access vulnerability. So, these cretins are actively watching everything, waiting for the first glimmer of a newly discovered problem. and they realize that there is going to be a lot of the systems patched quickly, so they're not wasting any time. And significantly, they are not finding any of these problems themselves. These are not high-end security researchers gone bad. They're living off of the interval in the delay to patch. They're not good enough to find the trouble themselves, but they are good enough to quickly weaponize a working proof of concept when it's posted to GitHub, then immediately turn around and employ it to gain entry wherever they can. And basically what he's saying is there's now a lot of them all basically competing for access to opportunities that appear whenever they do, and so it's who can get in there first. So Dimitri asks, tell me about some attacks that stood out to you. Which was the fastest? How long did it take from the first penetration into the network to receiving the payment? So Mikhail says, there were many interesting ones, but I would like to sum it up before talking about the attacks. There are small networks, there are medium networks, and there are very large networks. And I'll tell you, it's much easier to work with a network of an organization with $1 billion of revenue than in a network of an organization that has income of 9 million. I'll tell you why. There are many more computers that are easier to hide on and easier to navigate than in a small network where you are limited. You have to move very fast. And when I started my career, and I love the word career. It's like, this is a career, okay? When I started my career, I started with Bluekeep, a vulnerability in Microsoft Remote Desktop. I hacked 5 small networks per day because I had to go in and do it right away. But as I progressed, the time I spent on the hacks increased. He says, my longest development, probably everyone has heard about the Capcom company. I got there through a Fortinet vulnerability. As a matter of fact, when I went there, I was a little surprised that everything was in Japanese. There is no hierarchy. There's no division into departments, and they have everything in a big heap. I found a dead domain admin. That is how the name Babook, which is one of his monikers, appeared. He said Capcom had an admin Babak or Bambook. And when I found this administrator, I realized that no one uses him, but he was an enterprise type. Okay, so Mikhail is explaining that he found an abandoned active administrative account, which he was able to use, and he took Babook as one of his several aliases from then on. He said, the fastest attack in my life happened as soon as I got the proxy logon vulnerability. At that time, I had a programmer on a grant who was finalizing the exploit. One of the interesting networks was a logistics company in the Netherlands, large warehouse, very large warehouse. I got in and immediately obtained the domain admin tokens. These guys weren't very secure conscious and didn't worry about anything. I remember I went there at 8 p.m. Moscow time, and at about 4 a.m. Moscow time, so that was 8 hours later, he says, it was already all locked up, meaning he'd encrypted the works. He said, from 6 a.m., the administrator wrote to us in a panic, to which I told him, bro, wait for the supervisor. So anyway, he's saying that someone realized something was wrong, and Mikhail didn't want to talk to an underling. So he said, looking around the network, everything seems to be simple and clear. They have an administrator's domain for us. The password was the same for everything.
Oh, boy.
On hypervisors, on a backup server in the work group, everything. After analyzing the network, I found a WIM, Windows backup system. I could get all the passwords from it, right? Because it's an offline backup. He says, and thereby got all the backups, although their backups were so bad. He said, they just backed up to the NAS. He says, I went to the NAS and formatted it. Went to ESXi, encrypted, and then after about an hour, he wrote to us. So he says, the admin wrote right at midnight. He said, I would like to resolve the issue. I said that the issue could not be resolved because he was not a boss. In the morning, this is Mikhail, in the morning, I had to fly to another city. I remember sitting at the airport. The company writes to me, $2 million, transferring $2 million. He said, I have never had such an amount in my wallet.
Wow.
I get on the plane realizing that I have a laptop with $2 million. He says, well, I gave them decryptors. And when I arrived, I opened the chat. He says, damn it, something is not right there. They just yell, you destroyed VMDK. He says, of course, that's the file format, right, for ESXi virtual machines. He says, so they're screaming at him, you destroyed VMDK. He said, I tried to figure it out and asked for VMDK samples, but the VMDK files are 0 kbytes.
Ooh, that's not good.
So he writes, everything is screwed. I am writing to this developer who created the exploit for me. How could this happen? He says, well, I don't know. He said, something broke.
Nice. These are quality people we're talking here, I'll tell you.
And he says, and they asked to return the money. Well, he said, we had no choice but to block them.
Great.
So he said, we scammed them for this money. I still blame myself for this. It was the fastest and most solvent attack I've ever done.
Besides the fact this guy is an absolute scum bucket, the thing that really strikes me is how invulnerable he feels. He's confessing to at least 2 major crimes, Capcom and this Dutch warehouse, with absolute impunity. The Russians don't care.
Yeah, and he says something in a minute that I just... okay, so Dmitry says, how do you see the ransomware industry in 3 years? Will ransomware remain the best monetization model for cyber criminals, or will they move on to something else? Mikhail says, it's like how carding used to be popular, and there was a lot of money in it, but now it's dead. And ransomware will soon die. Not in 3 years, he says, but sooner. He says, and I disagree with that, but we'll see. He says, literally, everything, now this is interesting, literally, everything has changed over the last 6 months. And remember where he is. He's in Russia. He says, since the beginning of the special operation in Ukraine, almost everyone has refused to pay.
Oh, good. Good.
He says, I often encountered people who wrote to me in the chat, you are a Russian occupier. Be content with $10,000 and we won't give you more. At least take that. So he says, return on investment has completely fallen in the last 6 months. Oh, boo-hoo.
What investment. Jeez.
I know. Return on investment has completely fallen in the last 6 months. He says, it became difficult to work in general. Poor baby. He says, if it dies, meaning ransomware, it dies. You need to come up with something new. But ransomware is worse than heroin. I haven't tried heroin, but I've seen people who are on it. And I'll tell you this, ransomware is worse than drug addiction. There is so much money anywhere. There is no such money anywhere as there is in ransomware. I know. I even compared it to drug dealers from Hydra, the world's largest darknet marketplace, which was shut down this year. They earn less than we do. Okay, so he's calling this earning money. He says, and he finishes, but at the moment, ransomware remains the leader in monetization. There are no other schemes on the internet that would carry more monetization, or I don't know about them yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I read that, I'm struck by how casual Mikhail is about being a criminal. There's an utter lack of morality. He did appear to feel badly that his decryptor didn't reverse the encryption of the large warehouse's VMDK files, so he got 2 million without returning their data.
Yeah, he feels bad.
Yeah, well, and he had to block them because they were screaming at him.
Yeah.
So, but what seems to be utterly absent is the idea that extortion itself is wrong.
Right.
He talks about it as a career, like it's a legitimate profession that he's in, like his parents would be proud. As though if you have leverage over someone, using that leverage for your own personal gain at their loss is acceptable.
Horrible.
So anyway, I thought that everyone would find this interesting. These guys are not geniuses. They're computer savvy. They use other people's tools to force those abroad, meaning as not in Russia, to give them money.
Yeah, they're like criminals anywhere. They have zero moral compass, and I'm sure justify it in their mind. And, it's horrible.
Yeah. So, and I just don't cover the continuing ransomware problems. But I mean, it is because I know our listeners are like, yeah. But I mean, I skip over story after story after story.
Same with breaches. I don't even bother about talking about breaches anymore. It's nonstop.
Yeah.